Welcome to Taxidermy Truths, where we discuss the ins and outs of not only the taxidermy process, but the influences on the hunting community as a whole. With over 25 years in the wildlife and taxidermy industry, I host open conversations with artists, experts, and industry giants. From sustainable utilization to shipping rates, we dig into the reality of the experience after the safari and hear real stories worth remembering. Hi there, my name is Doug Cocroft and welcome to Taxidermy Truths. Today's a slightly more controversial topic. When planning it, I thought the best description would be the moral code of hunting versus conservation. For a long time, I remember hunters would use the catchphrase hunting for conservation. Conservation is hunting, and hunting is a conservation tool. And on the other side of the fence, the anti-hunting movement would argue, how can killing an animal be conservation? By definition, conservation is the preservation and not wasting of a commodity or a resource. So I can understand why at the surface one would question how taking away from the environment can be seen as adding to it, preserving it, and therefore conservation. As a taxidermist, I believe in the preservation of animals to respect them, to tell their story, to find that moment and capture it in an art form. As a hunter, I hunt because I love venison. And knowing that that venison, that wild meat, is clean, that it's been harvested in an environment that's fair. There wasn't stress. The kudus weren't put into what they call a race or a crawl and camped in and a bolt put behind their ear to end their lives. And the adrenaline builds up in the meat, and the panic builds up in the animal, and the fear builds up in that animal. Springbuck were not put into a small cage and one by one picked out and slaughtered. The animals that I hunt is fair chase. You walk, you stalk, and the animal more often than not gets the better and escapes. But I continue as a hunter because I also know that hunting matters. So quite often, if I get asked, why do you hunt? I hunt because it matters. Because I know that by hunting these animals, I am taking the pressure off the land in very often overpopulated areas. South Africa has an abundance of wildlife as a result of sustainable, responsible hunting, like it hasn't seen for 200 years. Yes, there was a time of mass eradication, but at that point there were very few rules, regulations, and backstops put in place to manage those environments. With the laws in South Africa, if you have an adequately enclosed property, the animals within that property belong to the landowner. The landowners are then responsible. They're the custodians for the genetics within their property. Now, a property in South Africa could be 100,000 acres. 80,000 acres, even 30,000 acres, which is relatively common. There are smaller properties. But as landowners farm the ground. Then the grass grows, and then you have a carrying capacity of what stock can be carried on that property. And by nature, hunters, landowners, ranchers, we love the land. We love the animals. Why, if we love the animals and the land, would we not conserve them? Protect them. Protect the resource. So it goes back to that moral compass. Is killing an animal the act of hunting conservation? From my perspective, I would argue strongly that yes, hunting is conservation. Hunting is a great conservation tool when managed efficiently and responsibly. In all industries around this globe, I believe that there are those who manage their businesses well. There are those that run their businesses ethically. There are those that are not ethical, whether it's manufacture of cars, a television, whether it's a restaurant. Every industry in the world can have a finger pointed at it for someone in that industry that is corrupt or not running a responsible operation. But to the vast majority that are running responsible operations, it is clear that their efforts are rewarded by an abundance of wildlife as we see in Africa today. Let's look at Kenya. I love Kenya. It's an incredible country. I had the privilege of spending time and doing walking safaris and guiding in Kenya, in the Masai Mara, in what is arguably one of the wonders of wildlife in Africa. I love the people and the cultures. I think it's a beautiful country. But hunting was removed from Kenya. And the facts are the facts. Since the removal of hunting from Kenya, poaching has exploded. And the number of wildlife seen in Kenya today is a fraction of what it was 50 years ago. By contrast, South Africa and Namibia, that have embraced hunting, that have embraced the utilization of a resource and the management, the effective management of it, we have seen our game numbers get bigger. The genetics get stronger. You look at the United States. The whitetail management program in the United States is one of the most effective management programs of wildlife in the world. It should be celebrated because with that program in place, our children's children will be exposed to the great outdoors. Whether they choose to hunt or not as a pastime, they will still be exposed to wildlife. Kenya? Who knows? Because the value of the animal in Kenya has been taken away. Yes, there's ecotourism. It's a wonderful market up there. The safari industry is thriving. But in order to create the funding necessary to grow those projects, and look after those environments and put anti-poaching measures in place, management, there's a huge price tag. And in order to reach that price tag, there have to be so many more visitors to take a photograph of that animal. The impact of so many visitors on that environment is negatively impacting the growth potential of the species in the area. With hunting, you, a guide, maybe someone to help with the field preparation, a tracker. Your impact as a hunter is so much lower. The prices that hunters pay to hunt is so much higher than the photograph price. So at the end of the day, the return that we get as a hunter for what we pay and what we contribute can only be seen as conservation. Something to be celebrated. But because there is so many opinions about hunting, and the opinions have been voiced on social media, I'm sure on podcasts like this and on television, that hunting is bad and hunting is killing animals and it's senseless killing. The facts tell a different story. The facts tell us that responsible hunting, managed offtake of a species in an area, will contribute to the enlargement of the gene pool and the further growth of species in that area. By managing the carrying capacity of the land under hoof, we manage what that land is able to produce. Again, hunters become the custodians of the wildlife, custodians of the farm, the ranch, the open tracts of land that you see throughout Africa. So the moral compass of hunting versus conservation, they point in the same direction. They point towards a prosperous genetic pool. They point towards the people of those areas having long-term returns from the resource at their fingertips. And because, unlike in Kenya, hunting contributes so dramatically to the local people's lives, the people support the movement. They protect the wildlife. They protect the land. In Kenya, sadly, without hunting, poaching is prolific. And it is causing the downfall of wildlife in Kenya. In South Africa, we have an incredible game reserve called Kruger National Park. I'm open to correction, but I mean, Kruger National Park is the size of Wales. It's an unbelievable environment. I've traveled through there a few times. I've been very privileged to be there. And I've seen leopards killing warthogs. I've seen herds of buffalo that you turn the engine of the vehicle off and you wait for half an hour, 40 minutes for this herd to cross in front of you. I've seen elephants by the 100. I've seen bird life that is magnificent. Kruger National Park has no hunting in it. Not for commercial value, but there is management. But the problem is, Kruger is also being subjected to a violent poaching. I'm not just talking about species like rhino, which have always been in the headlines because of the medicinal value in the East. I'm talking about buffalo, elephant, you name it. Poaching is one of the biggest threats to wildlife and wildlife areas anywhere in Africa. I go back to Kenya, take hunting, legitimize hunting away, and put poaching in its place, and we lose the wildlife. The same is happening in Kruger, where poaching is taking away from the natural populations. And because there is no value, when a poacher poaches, he doesn't discriminate. He doesn't go for the old bull that's past his breeding prime. He doesn't shoot out of a bachelor herd. He doesn't poach only the males. He doesn't look at a herd and say, I'm going to take that portion of the herd away because the land underneath it cannot support such a heavy population. No. The poacher takes whatever is in front of him. Young, old, male, female, breeding, pregnant, there is no difference to a poacher. Hunting is not poaching. Hunting is done with purpose. It's done with thinking. It's done by looking at the old, the sick, the lame. Hunting matters. So the compass, it points north. It points towards hunting being an incredible tool. I mentioned genetics. So if you look at the model of breeding and ranching any wild animal here in the US and Europe, the model is the same as with any other animal. If there is a financial benefit to it, the landowner will invest in protecting the commodity on his land. If wildlife ranching didn't have value, those ranch owners would remove the animals and put stock back on there and return to cattle or sheep. There's certainly a lot less pressure as a cattle farmer. The problem is, you take that land back for the cattle, and the wildlife loses its value. When wildlife loses its value, the cycle starts again. It gets eradicated. So to retain the value, hunting is a necessary end game. Genetic, that's the best way of putting this. Enlarging the genetic pool of wildlife is a responsibility that has been cast on the hunting fraternities. Landowners invest in the land, they invest in the security, they invest in growing the genetic pool, removing a bull that has been in that herd for too long, putting fresh genes into that environment. And by putting fresh genes in, so the diversity of gene pool expands, and you end up with the species, that particular species, growing, becoming healthy. I'm sure that in the old days, before there were fences, before Theodore Roosevelt went and hired a rifle and shot that buffalo, before man had boundaries and took ownership of land, animals moved freely. Animals moved in cycles. They followed weather patterns, migratory routes. Today, it's different. The fact is, in any city, even in any farming area, there are borders, there are boundaries. We have an ever-growing population of human beings on this planet that are demarcating where they live and what is theirs, what is mine. This is my land. As hunters, we stand up and say, we are responsible for those areas, and we will ensure that the land is managed so that the species can thrive. So yes, there's a lot of tension and hype around hunting versus non-hunting. But the facts are the facts. There's certainly not enough effort or finance thrown at the studies of the good that hunting does. That's what I believe. Whereas the non-hunters tend to come up with the most incredible facts. They take a photograph and alter it and blow it out of proportion. Propaganda. But at the end of the day, as a hunter, I know what I have to do is I have to practice responsible hunting, ethical hunting. I need to consider my actions. I need to take the high road. I need to walk that path that is not always the quick return lucrative path. I need to walk the path of doing what is right for wildlife. And if I choose that path, the hunter becomes the conservationist. this is slightly controversial, but I'm passionate about it. I'm passionate about hunting, about taxidermy, and about seeing that wildlife is around for my children and my future grandchildren to enjoy. Thanks for listening, and I appreciate your support in standing up for what is a truly incredible, absolutely amazing heritage as a hunter. Thank you for listening to Taxidermy Truths.